The Supreme Court ruling in favor of removing sharp razor wire installed by Texas.
The justices deciding to decide with the administration on this issue 5-4.
Last year, a lower court ruling barred the federal government from removing the fencing.
4 border crossing locations, including one that is in Texas, are all expected to reopen on Thursday.
The legal battle at the southern border over razor wire installed by Texas officials to stop migrants.
Pivotal order, significant impact. Recently, the Supreme Court issued a pivotal 5-4 order that has significantly impacted the ongoing legal battle between Texas and the Biden administration over border security measures. This decision, which has caused considerable upheaval, revolves around the state of Texas's actions and the federal government's response. Let's delve into the specifics of this case, the Supreme Court's intervention, and the subsequent developments. The case, titled Department of Homeland Security versus State of Texas, arose from Texas's efforts to manage its border with Mexico. Texas, led by Governor Greg Abbott, placed concertina wire along 29 miles of municipal and private land in the Eagle Pass area to curb illegal immigration. This move was met with resistance from the federal government, particularly the Border Patrol, which at times cut the wire to facilitate their operations.
The Supreme Court ruling in favor of removing sharp razor wire installed by Texas.
The Supreme Court tonight giving the Biden administration a win in its effort to remove that wire fencing.
It's lucrative for both parties to just throw kind of point fingers at one another and blame each other.
So the court's conservative majority was divided in its 5-4 decision in favor of the Biden administration's argument.
Texas sued the federal government in a Texas federal district court, claiming trespass and violations of the Administrative Procedures Act. Subsequently, Texas sought a preliminary injunction to prevent the federal government from cutting the wire while the lawsuit was resolved. Although the lower court initially granted a temporary restraining order to protect Texas's actions, it later denied the preliminary injunction. This denial permitted the federal authorities to resume cutting the wire. Texas appealed this denial to the Fifth Circuit of Appeals and requested an emergency injunction pending the appeal. The Fifth Circuit granted Texas's request for an administrative injunction, thereby maintaining the status quo and preventing the federal government from cutting the wire until the appeal was resolved. This temporary measure was critical in sustaining Texas's border security efforts during the legal proceedings. The Biden administration challenged the Fifth Circuit's administrative injunction by filing an emergency application with the Supreme Court. They sought to vacate the injunction, arguing that the Fifth Circuit's decision to maintain the status quo was improper. In a narrow 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court sided with the federal government, vacating the Fifth Circuit's administrative injunction. This ruling effectively allowed the federal authorities to continue interfering with the concertina wire installed by Texas. Governor Greg Abbott responded strongly to the Supreme Court's order. He issued a letter to the Biden administration asserting Texas's right to self-defense under Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution. This clause allows states to act in self-defense if the federal government fails to protect them from invasion.
The legal battle at the southern border over razor wire installed by Texas officials to stop migrants.
This is a big deal for the Biden administration and that showdown between Texas Governor Greg Abbott and the federal government.
Territory, and we are looking over every authority that we have.
This dispute has intensified recently when Texas fenced off a park in Eagle Pass.
The Supreme Court's order had set the stage for a significant legal showdown between Texas and the Biden administration. The federal government is leveraging the Supreme Court's decision to push for the dismissal of Texas's lawsuit. They argue that the case lacks merit and that the federal government's actions are within its jurisdiction. Texas, on the other hand, continues to fight back. The state insists that it has a constitutional right to defend itself and that the federal government's interference within its border security measures is unlawful. This legal battle, now intensified by the Supreme Court's intervention, is likely to have far-reaching implications for state and federal relations, especially concerning border security and immigration policies. The Supreme Court's 5-4 decision highlights the deep divisions within the judiciary regarding state versus federal authority on border security. The ruling underscores the challenges states face when federal policies and actions conflict with their efforts to manage local issues such as immigration control. Supreme Court's 5-4 order. The legal conflict began when Texas, under Governor Greg Abbott, installed concertina wire along 29 miles of municipal and private land in the Eagle Pass area to curb illegal immigration. The federal government, particularly the Border Patrol, frequently cut the wire to perform their duties, prompting Texas to take legal action. Texas appealed the denial of the preliminary injunction to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, requesting an emergency injunction pending the appeal. The Fifth Circuit granted this administrative injunction, maintaining the status quo and preventing the federal government from cutting the wire until the appeal was resolved. This temporary measure was essential for Texas to continue its border security efforts during the legal proceedings. The Biden administration challenged the Fifth Circuit's administrative injunction by filing an emergency application with the Supreme Court. They sought to vacate the injunction, arguing that the Fifth Circuit's decision to maintain the status quo was improper. Following the Supreme Court's order, the Fifth Circuit remanded the case to the lower court for further proceedings. The lower court was tasked with developing the factual record and potentially reviewing new evidence. This development was crucial for determining whether the initial denial of the preliminary injunction was justified. Taking advantage of the case being remanded, the Biden administration filed a motion to dismiss the entire case.
The Biden administration simply hasn't done enough to stop the number of migrants coming over from Mexico.
Of course, federal border agents there said that this wire was getting in the way of their duties.
It is really what Texas is doing is bonkers.
Last year, a lower court ruling barred the federal government from removing the fencing.
Texas contended that the evidence presented by the federal government was insufficient and that the state's claims deserved a full judicial review. The Supreme Court's order and the subsequent legal maneuvers underscore the complex interplay between state and federal authority in managing border security. The case has highlighted the challenges states face when federal actions conflict with their efforts to address local concerns, such as illegal immigration. For Texas, the Supreme Court's decision represents a setback in its attempt to unilaterally enforce border security measures. However, the state's strong response and continued legal battle underscore its determination to assert its rights under the Constitution. The case's outcomes will likely have significant implications for immigration policy and the balance of power between state and federal governments. Texas border wire dispute. In a recent border enforcement case involving Texas's use of razor wire, U.S. District Judge Aaliyah Moses expressed confusion and frustration over the purpose of an appeal court's demand for a follow-up hearing. This development arose from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals requesting additional evidence related to events that occurred 2 months after Moses had denied Texas's preliminary request to prevent the U.S. Department of Homeland Security from dismantling the wire along the Rio Grande.
Well, U.S. Supreme Court decision will allow Border Patrol agents to cut razor wire along the southern border.
The Biden administration had gone to the high court over this, arguing the fencing's impractical and dangerous.
I do feel America is starting to be impacted far more than just communities like mine.
As the nation is experiencing this crisis of unlawful immigration at the border.
This case, Texas versus U.S. Department of Homeland Security, highlights the contentious dynamics between state and federal authorities over border enforcement. Former President Donald Trump's visit to the park with Governor Abbott, where they criticized President Biden's handling of the border crisis, further amplified the political tensions. Testimony during the hearing revealed contrasting impacts of the state's actions. Mike Banks, Texas's border czar, testified that the number of migrants attempting to cross into Texas near the park had significantly decreased from thousands per day to just a handful since the state's takeover. In contrast, Danley of Border Patrol testified that the federal authorities lost 90% of their situational awareness in patrolling the area due to losing access to the park. He noted that while visibility and control have since improved, they have only regained half of their previous capability. The crux of the hearing revolves around Texas's efforts under Governor Abbott to enforce stricter border controls and the federal government's authority to manage border security. The razor wire along the Rio Grande has become a symbol of this clash, with Texas arguing that it is a necessary measure to curb illegal immigration, while federal authorities contend that it hampers their operations and endangers lives. Judge Moses' frustration underscores the broader issue of judicial and governmental coordination in handling border enforcement policies. The Fifth Circuit's intervention and the subsequent Supreme Court decision add layers of complexity to the judicial process, illustrating the challenges of addressing border security within the framework of federalism and intergovernmental relations. As the case proceeds, the outcomes will likely have significant implications for both state and federal approaches to border enforcement, potentially influencing future legal and policy debates surrounding immigration and border security in the U.S. The continuation of the hearing and the final ruling from Judge Moses will be crucial in shaping the ongoing conflict between state-led initiatives and federal oversight in one of the most contentious and politically charged areas of U.S. policy. Potential outcomes. As the case continues, several potential outcomes could shape the future of state-federal relations in border security. If the federal government's motion to dismiss is granted, it could set a precedent limiting states' ability to challenge federal immigration enforcement actions. If the case proceeds, it could lead to a detailed judicial examination of the balance of powers, potentially resulting in new legal standards for state involvement in border security. Regardless of the judicial outcomes, the ongoing conflict may prompt legislative actions at both state and federal levels to clarify and possibly redefine the roles and responsibilities in immigration enforcement.
The Biden administration today appealed to the Supreme Court to step in over the state's border control plan.
The justices deciding to decide with the administration on this issue 5-4.
4 border crossing locations, including one that is in Texas, are all expected to reopen on Thursday.
5-4 vote now clears the way for federal agents to actually cut down the wire.
The Supreme Court's recent order in the Texas border dispute marks a critical juncture in the ongoing legal battle between state and federal authorities. By vacating the Fifth Circuit's administrative injunction, the Supreme Court allowed federal authorities to resume interfering with Texas's border security measures. Governor Abbott's invocation of the constitutional right to self-defense has intensified the legal conflict, highlighting the complexities of state versus federal powers in managing immigration and border security. As the case proceeds, its resolutions will be pivotal in shaping the future of immigration policy and state autonomy in the U.S. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.